Hi everyone. Slightly later than promised.
Yeah, I
As a collective, we apologize.
yes, as a collective, because we win as a team and we lose as a team. We're on time as a team. We're late as a team. I did not have issues at the pharmacy.
No, and the American healthcare system is
It's great, no questions.
perfectly functioning.
Okay,
Functioning as designed, you could say.
I have to say this.
Oh,
I did say
must you?
I did say Lakers in 6 over the Warriors, didn't I? In
You
sharp
did.
in sharp
And
contrast to you and Ty saying
right.
Warriors in 6.
And obviously, the thing is, though, I haven't watched the NBA since the Sonics left Seattle. Obviously, from my hats that I wear, people can tell that I'm a massive
Mhm.
basketball watcher, or used
Sure,
to be.
sure.
Yeah. But my fellow European, Nicola, he gonna he gonna do the Lakers this
Your
time, I think.
fellow European, Maddie.
Well, I am European and Nicola is European, so you see
Sure,
how.
sure, sure. Um, what was I going to say? As always, it was going to be something really insightful, and then I forgot it. It was something Oh yeah. Speaking of basketball in England, and you being from England, do you know Matthew Bryan Ammoning? Do you know the name?
Vaguely.
He's from the UK. I think he's from England, and he played for UW. He was a good
Yeah,
forward for a while. He's pretty good.
yeah, very vaguely. Cool,
Anyway, yeah, his
great,
nickname was MBA.
right. Well, it's quite late, so should we just do a Seahawks
Yeah, let's do
podcast?
it. My fault. Let's do it.
Okay, let me do the intro again. This is Seahawks podcast. If you're watching on YouTube Live, you can find us if you search Seattle Overload in your podcast app. So that could be any of them, but I use Spotify, no free ads, Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, whatever you fancy. And give us a 5-star review. Download the show. It's edited. It's all cut up. You don't get this preamble, which is shorter than usual. But you do get an edited product. So please do support us like that. Follow Griff at C Mike's Bin Move. Follow me at Matty F Brown. Follow Ty at Dane Gunzelers. And yeah, let's do the podcast. Welcome to the Seattle Overload podcast, where slightly belated, but Griffin and I have the opportunity and we want to recap the Seahawks rookie minicamp, which is it a 3-day event, Griff, or is it 2 days?
I believe it's 3.
Wow, 3 days. It happened in 2023. Seattle has 10 draft picks who were there. They also had a lot of undrafted free agents. Lots of things went on. But before that, some Seahawks news. Seattle restructured the contract of Tyler Lockett. Why would they do that? Well, they're kind of tight up against the cap when they need to sign some of their 10 draft picks that I mentioned and their undrafted free agents. So they converted $8.535 million of Tyler Lockett's 2023 salary into a signing bonus, which freed up $5.69 million of cap space in this season. That pushes basically his future cap hits down the line. But for now, it meant that Seattle was able to sign who they listed as a defensive end, Mario Edwards Jr., and also nose tackle Forrest Merrill. Now, Mario Edwards Jr. was most recently with the Tennessee Titans, and Forrest Merrill played 4 games for the Los Angeles Chargers in 2021. He, of course, playing in a Brandon Staley, you could say Vic Fangio style defense. So something to note there. Griff, you like edge rushers, you like defensive line, you like even innie outie defensive line, which Mario Edwards is, right? What do you think
I
of
do.
him?
I think it's a fine pick. It's or a fine signing. It's the kind of signing that they're always in the market for, and I think he is a hit. The only guy that they've taken at this kind of time of year and expenditure that hasn't worked, I think, has been Shamar Stefan, and otherwise their hit
Oof.
rate is extremely high. Like everyone they bring in on like, for under 3 million to eat up snaps on the inside always ends up kind of getting what they want, right? What's interesting about him is he hasn't really been an interior player since 2020, and well, technically 2021, but he barely played in 2021. He played more in 2020, and he was a legit like end in their 3-4 scheme. So he was playing 3 technique, 4-eye. He was 1 gapping, he was 2 gapping or power stepping and mirror stepping, right? Gap and a half, etc. And then, but then when he went to Tennessee kind of plays with like even space a lot. They play a lot of like that. What is it, like the tough front, or like what Seattle called? No, Seattle called it tough. I think Fangio calls it. What do they call it? Tilt. I don't know what Belichick and
it looks like
call it.
Basically a reduced over front, where it's like a 6-1 box or a 6-2 box, depending on certain things.
Yeah. So he's essentially playing 5 technique, like outside shoulder. He's an edge is what he's been for Tennessee, and he was really good at that. And now obviously the downside is that for Tennessee he wasn't giving them great edge rush, right?
He had 3 sacks last year and 4 tackles for loss.
Yeah, so he's not particularly productive on a per snap basis either. However, if you're just talking about as an edge rusher, contrasting him with, say, Draymond Jones as an edge rusher, he's a little bit more juice than Draymond as an edge rusher. So where that is interesting for Seattle is, although I think they primarily view him as a rotator on the inside.
Griff, what do you mean by juice?
Like just ability to explode and do something on the edge.
Okay.
Like Draymond Jones as an edge rusher doesn't really give you anything. Although there is some logic to using him on the edge for run purposes in the pinch, right? Like in their nickel packages on early downs, like 2-4-5 or 4-2-5, whatever ends up being. Mario Edwards is kind of the same deal, but I think he might give you a little bit more edge rush on the outside. But all that said, I think he's primarily a run defender on early downs. But he's quick, he's explosive. He's always been undersized for his roles that he's played in Las Vegas or Oakland and Chicago. So he has really good play strength, leverage technique, and all that stuff. I think he can be a useful player for them, and he's really flexible too. And he's really good depth for Draymond, and kind of mirrors Mike Morris a little bit in usage, I think. So they can do some interesting things with him. The last thought I have, though, is that the one guy that they brought in at this point in the process was on the lighter side. So again, it's like they're kind of lacking like pure beef. Like the beefiest guy they have was a guy who weighed in at 304 pounds at the combine, and his pro day has since put on weight. Well,
we'll talk about Forrest Merrill, who they also picked up, who is a bit beefier. But
true.
But with Edwards Jr., that experience in Chicago that you mentioned, that's obviously a Vic Fangio defense. He also spent time in Oakland, where that was with Ken Norton Jr., but they were running kind of a hybrid, weird system. There are elements of Fangio within that, given Jack Del Rio's experience within that system. So when he was at Stanford, so he's kind of versed in those things. It's interesting, like you said, how he's more of a kind of like he feels more like an under front guy and a bare front guy maybe, but I could see him playing under as the 5 tech in under, and he also feels more like a power stepper to me than a mirror stepper. So more signs maybe that Seattle's going to run more 5 down, maybe more nickel bare. He's only 280 pounds, probably playing a bit heavier now. I don't know, but if he's on the edge last year, maybe he's a similar weight. It'd be interesting to see what he actually plays out in Seattle if we ever find out about that. But what stood out to me was Pete Carroll when he was talking about this in his press conference. He said, opening minicamp, he said how he's really pumped about it. And we know Pete Carroll's enthusiastic, but this kind of stood out to me, how much he elaborated, given Seattle only officially signed Mario Edwards the following Monday. Like, he had no reason to go this far, but Pete said how he'd identified Edwards as someone when they started free agency who could help them. And he mentioned his versatility, the fact that he'd played end, as we said, the fact he's also stood up and had his hand in the ground, played inside as a 3 tech, and how he's played everywhere along the line. Says he's really quick and plays really hard. He's got a really good attitude about him. And also, Carroll mentioned how he's going to be able to compete immediately for the first pass rush group. So, what Seattle calls the cheetah grouping, or has in the past called it, where when they need 4 guys to go rush the passer, they're playing even front. So, in a pass rush mode only, they're playing a nickel even or even a dime even front. That Edwards is going to compete for that. And in theory, that grouping now would be Edwards. Well, they'll compete for it, but in theory, it'd be Edwards, Jones, Taylor, Nwosu, say. I
Yeah.
think Reed's probably had those days passing by, but there will be a competition for that, of course. But that's what this allows them to do. Right. So Forrest Merrill, Griff, probably watched less of him, haven't you? Because
I
I
haven't.
certainly have.
Yeah, I haven't watched anything of him, actually. But right off the bat, we know that he played in the system, played 4 games last year. He's 330 something. He's like, what is he? 6', 6'1".
6'1", 338 pounds at the combine.
So he screams like nose depth, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, we'll want to dive into him and see what he's like as a player. I don't. He's probably a long shot to make the team, but the fact that he has NFL reps and recent NFL reps is a good sign. So maybe there's something there. He's actually been. I think he had short arms.
32 inches.
Okay, it's not terribly short, but it's not on the long side. That other end that they signed an undrafted free agency was 270. He had 33, 34-inch arms, so it was like, oh, okay, they just brought him in because of the profile, probably. But anyway, that's MJ Anderson. But so yeah, with Merrill, I don't know. I think that he's probably third in the depth chart right now at pure nose tackle behind Cam Young and Robert Cooper, and then it's probably him. And I doubt that they carry 3 nose tackles, so maybe hopefully they're eyeing him for the practice squad, because you never know with injuries. And then as the season goes on, and then as well, Brian Monet is probably out of the picture, right? So they probably need a fallback plan that they're familiar with should they ever need to fall back on someone.
Yeah, I should say Merrill played those 4 games with the Chargers in 2021 as a undrafted free agent rookie. And then in 2022, he was waived injured in August 2022 and hasn't been on a roster since, as far as I'm aware. So he's been out of, out of it for a while. So this is really a deep depth kind of signing, but one they need with Brian Monet being out with an ACL injury, which will take a while to recover from. Alwoods signing elsewhere. Alwoods did sign elsewhere.
Yeah, Jets.
But obviously, Seattle chose to move on from him. And yeah, their only guy over 304 pounds, or we'll talk about his weight in a second, but Cameron Young is a rookie. So they needed some more established stuff.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. So moving on. I think that's the signings done. And if you're in the chat, please do feel free to contribute. Derek Gilbert asks, thank you so much for the donation, Derek. What does certified gargoyle mean?
I have a feeling that's directed toward me. I recently described.
Well, hang on now. I've occasionally dabbled in gargoyle usage. Now, I don't know if I've ever gone with certified, to be fair. So please go ahead.
Well, so there's a whole demon taxonomy, right? Like goblin, gargoyle.
Mm-hmm.
So certified gargoyle, it was in reference to Devin Witherspoon. He plays like he's a bat out of hell at all times, but then it's never just like, it's like all the time. Like literally he does something the first 10 snaps of every game, like first drives, first series. So certified gargoyle is you got to see it and then you'll know it.
That's literally what I was going to say. I think, you just watch the tape, Derek, and honestly go with your gut. It's one of those things when you see it, you'll know, and you can't be wrong really, but just be confident in yourself. Get yourself some tape watching reps, which I'm sure you have, and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the donation, Derek. Right. So interestingly, and I think something that's come out with Seattle announcing their undrafted free agents and actually having to list them in positions, But I was struck by how Robert Cooper, the undrafted free agent out of Florida State, he was listed as a nose tackle. Now, he has really short arms, like under 32 inches, right? And so he's kind of an interesting contrast to that Forest Merrill edition as the kind of short armed, big nose tackle. But I kind of get the sense that Seattle's roster this season is much more suited to running this kind of 3-4 scheme. Like they have the bodies now, other than a nose tackle. Nose tackle is a problem, but if they're going to run bear and more nickel bear as well, look at the drawing if you're watching on YouTube. If they're going to run that more often, then they've got the ends to do it. Like Mario Edwards listed as a defensive end, Draymond Jones listed as a defensive end. Jaron Reed, is he technically a defensive end on the roster? But
Yeah.
it's, they've got a number of bodies to do that. And then they have a lot of guys who are called nose tackles who, when Seattle does occasionally get into even fronts, there are times where they might play on the outside shoulder of the guards as a 3 technique, the same spot one of these defensive ends can play. But along with that, the outside linebacker group, like the guys they've added, you remember when they first started doing these bear fronts at a high rate in 2020 or even 2021, where they had Carlos Dunlap and Darrell Taylor, and that was it. You ended up with Benson Mayowa playing significant reps, which Benson Mayowa tried his best, but he was very much in the Sam linebacker role of you don't really want him to rush that often. Okay, he did a few things, but you want him to pass drop more often, so it's not that genuine rush or drop threat off the edge. But now they have in 2023 the outside linebackers all can rush or pass drop in theory. Uchenna Nwosu, Darrell Taylor, Boye Mafe, Derek Hall, they all fit that description of guys who can rush or drop and be genuine at doing both. And if Seattle is going to run more bear fronts, which especially in the nickel thing, because that's where the real splits starts being evident, right? Then I think they have the guys to do it. They're 4 deep there. Obviously, you can't rule out Tyreek Smith, who had a kind of injury redshirt yet, but he's very much on the periphery now. Have to see what happens with Alton Robinson. But they have the dudes. The only thing is the nose tackle spot, but they've clearly thought we can go cheap there. We can go young there. We'll see what happens. But it just seems way more 3-4, and it's almost like it took a year for the front office to get to grips with, well, we were doing the bear front in 2020 and 2021. So really just keep adding the same type of play. You don't need to trip. Schneider spoke about how it takes a while with new systems. Maybe they're starting to get it, unless the disaster would be if they continue more of the same of last year's approach with a lot of 2-4-5 nickel, because I don't think they have the guys to do that.
Yeah,
but we'll see.
Well, are they getting too light though? If surely they don't want both spots. Like they might have an archetype where they want one guy to be 300 whatever, and the other guy can be that 285, 290 guy. Because they've got 3 of those body types right now between Jones, Morris, and now Edwards. So maybe they kind of view like it's kind of like the big end spot of old, and then there's the 3-tech spot of old, but a little bit heavier on the big end side of things. Because maybe it goes back to wanting that versatility to be an under team whenever they want and be a bear team whenever they want. Well, then the other thought I have is kind of back to the 2-4-5 thing. If they're consistent about the big, at least on mixed tendency downs where you can run and pass, not just like it's, third, it's not 2nd and 12 and they're in gun spread. Like it's, where they can still be running the ball in 2nd and 4, right? Or 1st and 10, even if it's 11 personnel and you want to match up with nickel. When they get into their 2-4-5 stuff, they might want the versatility to go in and out of that kind of effectively like that reduced over thing where it looks like mint. And they can just reduce that the field outside linebacker, who's or maybe to the bubble side, the side of the 2-eye, and have him pinch into the B gap. Even if he's standing up still, like knife into it a little bit. And maybe they want a bigger body to do that. So maybe that's why they're rostering more of these body types as well, to be more flexible. Like they can go in and out of it.
It does feel like there's guys who would be more suited to being on the open side. So away from the strength you've designated, which would often be the tight end, or the closed side, which would be to the strength you've designated, or to the tight end, hence the closed aspect of the formation. It does feel like that, which that's how they always did it in the 4-3. The lines
Right.
blur. I think that's an important point. And there are comments that we'll get to from Clint Hurt, Pete Carroll, from a radio appearance from Clint Hurt, which is pretty revealing. But as we finish up on the minicamp stuff, Carroll on Derek Hall, who I just talked about, he said how he's 255 pounds, he looks the part, and Clint Hurt was really taking care to make sure he was getting up to speed, getting off to a good start. Pete said that he could do everything for them because apparently he knows how to drop, which is a pretty big thing. I still haven't fully dived into his whole resume, but I remember thinking his drops looked a bit well, the drops asked of him weren't asking for that much urgency into coverage, but maybe I just missed something. And anyway, so moving on to that nose tackle, Cameron Youngriff. The fact that he was 304 pounds at the combine, he's come in at 320 pounds. I mean, that's what Seattle asked of him, and he's doing that. So
Yeah.
that's a positive. 4th round nose tackle out of Mississippi State.
Mm-hmm. And he did say in his interview, they asked him like, how are you being played and stuff. And I think you tweeted that his exact quote, but he said how in college we were asked to slant a lot, like shoot gaps. We were moving the line a lot, and now here it's more gap control, more gap and a half. So the premise there being like it's just where they're focusing technique in Seattle, like they're not a chop the front up team, that they don't throw a lot of action at the line of scrimmage. They really emphasize just playing your technique, playing slow, and then just kind of choking the blocking scheme out. At least in terms of talking about the run. So I found that interesting. So there will be an adjustment period for him. Now I think he can handle it. Like you have said that he's a good power stepper. I mean, he does have good technique.
Yeah, there was small amount of reps on tape showing him do that where it looked really good, and like immediately I was like, oh, that's a Seahawky kind of style. But also Pete Carroll mentioned when talking about him in his rookie minicamp presser that he's real bright about the position, understands and all. So he's clearly picking it up.
Yeah, which is good.
So Young as well, he spoke about how either in Seattle their gap control, which is when we talk about power stepping, a 6-inch power step, playing an outside shade, so outside shoulder of the guard, outside shoulder of the center. If you're nose tackle in the system, what Young will mainly be outside shoulder of the center, or gap and a half. He mentioned, which in Seattle for Young that would probably be 2-eye, where you're inside shoulder of the guard and you're taking a 6-inch lateral mirror step, mirroring the angle departure of the guard in that case. Or, the zero technique in the bear, so the head up nose tackle, that's like a unique situation where you're mirroring the angle of departure of the center when head up on him, but then you're looking to still hit him and then lag into the backside A gap most of the time, unless you get like a draw play, then you can go front side. So that is still mirror stepping, but it's less gap and a half. It's more, it's an odd situation.
You're not likely to
gap and a half.
You're not likely to work in the front side gap. Although Al Woods, I wonder if they just let Al Woods do what he wanted, because
I think draw plays, and maybe if you get guard pull and can make a play.
Yeah, against zone, I guess he wasn't ever really doing it, but
right. So yeah, it's cool that Cameron Young's added the weight, and another guy who's added the weight is Mike Morris. So Mike Morris at the combine was 275 pounds. Does that sound right?
Yeah, he was supposedly,
And now he's listed at 295 pounds on the roster. He said he was 294 pounds, but what's a pound?
And
he's currency. But
there you go.
Yeah, nailed it. But
very good.
That's pretty cool how he's in that mold. They're going to be playing him inside. He's another defensive end in the system. He'll play mainly 3 tech, power step, I think, to start off with.
Yeah. And I am still very curious about all this because in the drills, like it's so early, you're not supposed to like really parse anything from drills, but he seems a little like he doesn't have the density for it. I mean, his pad level was fine, but I wonder if his hips were too high. And that was something I said on the edge. His hip level, pad level was fine. But on the inside, I wonder if he's just going to have to get used to bending at the knees more and exploding. Like, does he still have the movement skills while getting that low to the ground? It's going to be interesting to watch. I feel like on the front side of gap scheme, he's going to get blown off the ball. If he has to take on a double from a tight end and the tackle, I just don't see it happening year one for him. But I am curious. Like I'm only going to be judging Morris against the run in like one-on-one situations. Like that's what he has. That's his starting point, right?
Yeah, you can't expect him to do that well against like a tackle guard combo. At that point, you've got to scheme better for him, you know?
Yeah. And I can see like mirror stepping, like Keon White had that problem where he would get too high mirror stepping, so he doesn't really get to like dig in, right? It's the lateral step, it was harder for him to bend at the knees. I can see that being a problem with Morris as well if he has to play 4-eye, which he will some. But I think with his length and movement skills, kind of when things really get rolling, I think he'll actually be able to kind of recover. That was another thing with Keon, like the long, tall guys, they recover really well even if they get uprooted at the snap. So I think with Morris, that will kind of be his thing. But when he's playing 3 technique, when he's power stepping, 1 gapping, I really want to see if he has surge and how he holds up against guys that are trying to get under him and try to move him, because that will really define like how he fits in the scheme.
Yeah.
So, because it's all about unlocking his pass rush on early down, so it only comes with serviceable run defense.
Yo, on the subject of that as well, actually, and you know, looking at the clips and it being very much a case of over analysis, but day 1 or day 2 footage versus day 2 or day 3 footage, when he was striking, and it's probably just practicing both techniques. Like, but the first time I saw a clip, which was from the previous day, the earliest day, or the earlier clip. Anyway, he was using a 3-point technique. And then the second time, I'm pretty sure he was using a 4-point. So I don't know if that's them going, you know what, we'll try in a 4-point, see which is best for you. I mean, this is what rookie minicamp's for. If they're going to coach him both, but we're talking like the challenges of 1, adapting to the inside. Everything happens quicker there. 2, being a taller guy and having to do that. It's going to be a work in progress. So I really like, it's a fun kind of pick. But now they've signed Mario Edwards Jr. Now they've signed Draymond Jones. Well, they had signed Draymond Jones, but yeah. And they've got Jaron Reed. He's not a starter. Like, he's a depth kind of rotation piece that they needed to develop. Now, could he become a starter if he excels? Yes. But if we're looking realistically, they will not have him penciled in to start this year.
Right. And on that point that you mentioned about the 4-point, they actually, Denver, in their tight bear front, they would actually have Draymond Jones in a 4-eye with a the 4-point stance with his outside foot up and his inside foot back, meaning he's a legit 4-eye, not a 3 technique. So it kind of just lets him explode into it. Now he's technically power stepping with that, so maybe he doesn't have a gap and half assignment. It's just to help him engage the block and come out low. I could see them experimenting with that with Morris too. So,
and Seattle did let LJ Collier, for instance, using 4-point at times in similar alignments. Puna Ford, I believe, occasionally would do that as well. So they're open to it, especially in the kind of 4-eye stuff. So anyway, right. Final thing I wanted to talk about, and I completely blew it. The top news was that the two top picks for Seattle were limited due to their soft tissue things, which is a classic thing where guys, they train for the combine. Bill Belichick spoke about this before. He spoke about a lot of things before. If you ask him a question he deems worthy, or he's just being nice, but guys train for like the kind of speed of stuff, and they end up suffering soft tissue things or having soreness there, and then they're not quite ready for football shape yet. And so, maybe that's what happened with Devon Witherspoon, Seattle's number 5 overall selection, or wide receiver Jackson Smith and Jigba, their number 20 overall selection. But both those guys were limited at rookie minicamp. Wasn't anything wrong necessarily. Seattle just taking the precautions, and yeah, that's that. We didn't get to see them that much, But what we did see from Smith and Jigba was interesting. So he was working with Sanjay Lal, the wide receivers coach. Not surprised there. But the drill that Bob Condotta of the Seattle Times tweeted out was very interesting to me. So he started holding up, basically, in Jigba, who was leaning forwards, basically training him to lean forward in his pads out of his stance and keep that pad level low for the takeoff. And then the receiver ended up running a hitch or a comeback, or curl, sorry. And because he's maintaining the low pad level, he takes less steps at the top of the route, but also he's selling vertical at the start of it. And this is something that I couldn't find the actual quote, but DK Metcalf or Sanjay Lal, one of the two, spoke about the other, saying how they'd worked together on this for their game, and it came to rise when Metcalf was talking about running stutter hitches and that type of route. But anyway, the kind of finer details Smith and Jigba's got to still learn. It's going to be very cool to see him kind of unlock those elements to his game. Because on the surface, you look at this drill and you're like, oh, they're working how to get off press because Lowell has his hands on in Jigba, but they're not.
Sure.
They're working on that right body position out of the stance and showing the kind of impact of it, which...
So they're not tipping whatever route they're running, making it all look the same, yeah.
Right, and just efficiency of movement, less added steps throughout the phase of it, and faster. So,
yeah.
Pretty cool. And yeah, with the spin, unfortunately, while we saw flashes of Njigba, with the spin, I saw nothing, which is because we didn't get clips. I'm sure he did some cool things, but that will come in good time. On that subject, lack of photos to analyze, so hopefully they'll come. But I may have ruined that for myself. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but there were loads of great pictures last year, and then suddenly this year, after the Denver game,
What happened?
Where's the high res images of certain laminated pieces of paper?
Yeah, what's going on there?
Yeah, why is it all blurry suddenly? Anyway, that's fine. So, finally, Griff. Oh, 509 Adventures. Miles Adams is a 3, right? Remember seeing him at nose some last year. He did play nose last year. Part of that was because in the 2-4-5, so the two interior defensive linemen, the two D tackles in that nickel system, the over G front, they had to basically flop and play 2-eye off 3-tech, and it just so happened that Adams ended up at 3-tech. But they did also at 2-eye, sorry, so the nose spot. But they did also play him over the center sometimes.
He definitely did. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was just them trying to find a body to do that, and for rotation purposes. But he was not the right guy to do that with. They messed up how they played their guys last year, and he should definitely be more of a kind of defensive end. So yeah, his best stuff is at 3 technique, and he one-on-one with a guard, let him go to work.
Agreed. And I think he's one of the guys that if you're going to mention anyone that is maybe a sleeper to be productive in pass rush, I'd always throw his name out there because he's so explosive and squatty, and he's got moves. Like, he's always had moves, and he really came alive in the last couple of drives, I think, against the Jets. He has some devastating bull rushes. I mean, he's got talent. So I really hope he can grow enough on early downs that he can be like one of their mainstays on the inside. So yeah, we're always rooting for Miles around here.
Yep, big Miles Adams podcast. So finally, some media comments. So Clint Hurt went on 710 ESPN Seattle, or Seattle Sports now, with Michael Bumpus and Stacey Rost, and he talked about Seattle's defense last year, and it was a bit of a weird listen, to be honest, but he was asked basically if the defense was... He was asked about the 2-gap, 1-gap thing. And his answer basically said how they're going to be better this year playing the run. But when people talk about the 3-4, they actually did more 2-gapping in previous years. But because of the move to the 3-4 personnel system this year, people assume that there's going to be more 2-gapping this year. So, Griff, what was your takeaway with Hurt's comments. And if you haven't seen them, Bob Condota tweeted them out. I quote tweeted it with my takes on this, which you're going to hear now. So
Well, he said that they had actually they did less two gapping this past season than the year prior. I found that odd because is he just because the coaches they know they're talking to the media, right, and the masses, so they don't really they don't ever speak like full like disclosure, right? And then they kind of bucket things together and they kind of just hand wave them and they're wishy-washy with their language. When I wonder if when Hurt said two gapping, is he just conflating that for the sake of discussion, for the sake of the exercise in that conversation? Is he just conflating that with 3-4? Because within 3-4 they can one gap and two gap, or do one. They can do it either or both at the same time, right? With one player doing one and one the other, or because obviously, like we know and he knows, they did less 3-4 last year, and in their 2-4-5, they're asking their interior two defensive tackles to two gap, quote unquote. So, like, what is he really saying with that? Because so the way I extracted that was we actually did. The only thing that makes sense from that statement is he's really saying in coded language, we did less bear, less 3-4, less 3-3-5 last year compared to the previous seasons.
And this is how it gets a bit messy, because obviously you don't want to ask, especially when you're running your own radio show for the masses, you want to ask a scheme question, but you don't want to narrow it into a corner too much. You don't want to make it too technical. And so if you ask a question in this way, you can get a slightly funky answer, which actually, like, it gives you a bit, like, it gives you an interesting comment, but it's also actually not very clear at all, like, how this is a thing. Now, I have two theories. So my first theory is that Hurt was talking about how basically last year, if you think about it, they were planning even in the bear stuff to run 2-4 eyes all the time. And they did start with that, which in layman's terms is two gapping. But after week 6, they stopped that. So they went back to how they did it last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then from like week 15 onwards, when our Woods went down and they were just trying to find stuff to which worked, they moved more to an underfront, which was basically power stepping. Everyone was one-on-one, one gapping. There was no reduction to that. It was a very basic version of under with no reduction, nothing, and that was pure one gapping
Right.
across the board. So is he talking about that kind of deal?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Because they did run a lot of that. So I don't know. I feel like he's just he's just kind of like, yeah. Go ahead.
And my other theory was, is he just like, if they call this two gapping, often they actually are meaning gap and a half. Is he like really getting into semantics? But that seems less
Yeah.
likely.
Well, so I mean, they technically don't. When I think like true two gapping, I feel like you're talking about like never mind. Never mind. We don't need to get into it right now.
But they don't often. They don't. The point being, they very rarely true two gap.
Right.
So I think
It's two gap technique, not two gap assignment per se.
yeah. But I think
Whatever.
like, so just to clarify though, in the 2-4-5, we believe that the 2-eye technique certainly was told to play gap and a half, and the 3-tech was, and then the way that the
I mean, they're both
linebackers
mirror
often
stepping.
fit
Yeah.
that was stacking those guys and then playing off them, right?
Right. They're just fitting off them, even when it's cover 3. So it's like what do they call it? Cloudy clear. If it's
Yeah.
cloudy, then you correct the guy. If it's
I really
clear,
don't
then
want
you
to
shoot
talk
the
about this
gap.
though, because it gets me really upset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but in too high, so even though in too high, you've got a 7. If there are 7 gaps, no, if there are 8 gaps, you have 7 guys in the box. But the quarter safety, if it's half quarter, quarter, half, he's in the fit as a primary fitter. So the linebackers they're playing with 8-man spacing, meaning there's 8 guys in the fit, even though there's 7 guys in the box. So theoretically, it gives the linebackers some ability to get vertical. because they're playing as though it's one high, even though it's not. And it's really hard on the safety to come down. That's why they have some of the linemen up front two gap to buy time for him. But because they are then playing a mirror stepping, two gapping ish technique, the linebackers still have to play laterally and hesitant. So,
And I think the reason they did that in one gap as well is because they want to fit it like a 4-2 or 2-4 structure. The point being, they don't want the safety or the nickel to have to worry about the run or read run pass. They just want them to play pure pass until they get a clear run read where they can rally to the ball.
yeah,
So the basic premise is to defend play action, the cross is better, keep
well,
that guy out of the fit until he's needed. But
agree.
it gets pretty hairy when, as we've seen, a tight end's brought into the picture uh, to the side of that dude. Or,
The,
even in two high Seattle last year, they would have the quarter safety read, run, pass. And if it got a run read, he'd fit into, if he had on his side a tight end, he'd fit into that C gap and they'd fit the run from two high effectively. Just watch the tape.
yeah,
And they put him into the boundary to make that a shorter, easier deal for him. But this year, the safety reads right from the preseason. I was like, this doesn't make sense to me because this looks so loose. And
yeah,
I came to understand that that's just how the Fangio tree does the 2-4-5 run fit. They just don't have those guys that their keys are odd. They kind of just BS it. And
yeah.
how
They
viable that
totally
is,
do.
like, I mean, we're getting into the weeds here, but
Well, and so if you delay the safety's keys, then it becomes essentially a crack and replace thing with the corner because the safety gets climbed
yeah,
on,
and
and then the
and they have
corners
little
didn't know what they were
adjustments
doing.
for the corner technique to make that work a bit more. But yeah,
Yeah, and then the other thing is, well, if you have a loaded box, why would you ask them to two gap? Because you're trying to accommodate the two high shell, right? The problem with that again is if you because offensive linemen and the quarterback know what a two gap stance is and what a one gap stance is. So if you change your stance, they know the safety's coming down or the safety's staying high, depending on what the stance is. So you're kind of tipping the coverage too by the defensive lineman alignment. So that's the other problem. So they kind of have to maintain the guise of what they're trying to hold that too high shell and only spinning down. But the thing is, it got to that point, right, where they were preloading the box pre-snap. So it's like you're not even pretending anymore. Just play football. Just play football the way. But I think they're thinking long term. No, we have to get the technique down, so we still have to do this for the
mhm.
sake of it.
And the
Whatever,
other
man.
thing about that Clint Hurt interview, which was interesting to me, was pretty much unprompted. The first thing he started with was talking about pass rush and pass coverage, the importance of rushing
Yeah,
coverage.
and
Like
that's why.
that's
Sorry,
the
go
whole
ahead.
premise.
Right. That's why they in 11 personnel they cut their 3-3-5 snaps in half in favor of the 2-4-5. They want edge rush, right? But
So
they overdid it. They overdid it.
yeah, and to be honest, like, and I'm sure internally, Clint Hurt is more aware, but this interview was slightly concerned.
I liked it still just because I don't know. I'm picking out things out of it that I'm choosing to see. Well, the other
Yeah,
thing I
it's you are the optimist, and I am the
yeah.
pessimist.
The other thing that is more of a neutral note that I found interesting was when he called the 3-4 front they ran an under front, which he akin to like a 4-3 under front. Obviously, he knows they still ran a good percentage of bear. He knows bear is an under, but then I thought when he said that, does he in
Well,
his just what?
think again about the 2015 week 15 onwards thing where that was pure under. That wasn't
True,
bumped
true.
into.
True, true, true. But I do wonder if he, as a defensive line coach, if he in his mind buckets all like an eagle or a bear or tight or a true under front as kind of under because the weak side B gap is closed. And then from that cascades a bunch of assumptions you can make about what the offense would or wouldn't do or what it means for your front. Like, because the one thing all those fronts have in common is the weak side B gap has no bubble, right? So I wondered if he kind of has like a philosophical thought of like, well, a bear is basically a type of underfront in his mind. I wonder if he thinks about football in that way. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I just that was kind of an aside because it's hard to run gap scheme weak against an under front for the same reason it's hard to run gap scheme weak against a bear front, right? If you can funnel everything strong, then you're either managing a strong side B gap bubble or a strong side C gap bubble, depending on if you're in bear or true under. And then if you're an eagle, it's a C gap problem again, and then maybe an A gap problem. I don't know. I found that interesting, but he's probably just hand waving and just saying, 4-3 versus 3-4 doesn't matter for the run. And it also doesn't matter for like skill sets. You're either a good player or you're not, and they have their
Honestly,
preferences.
the whole 3-4-4-3 thing, to me, the biggest thing was getting the front office to be able, and I guess this is obvious, but it's just getting the front office to actually pick and get the players who fit what they were doing schematically already.
Right.
Like, it's just a way of calibrating them.
Right.
And it just took them a year, but maybe they
Right.
finally worked that one out. Or maybe it just took them, I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was Clint Hurt's comments. And then finally, Pete Carroll went on the interview with Brock and Salk. And that was so interesting. That was a brilliant interview. You should listen to it. He said a lot of stuff that he'd already said, mentioning how they've always been a 4-3 scheme that plays with 3-4 personnel. And it was basically the whole what we've just said.
Yeah.
They have these outside linebackers. They're trying to get faster. How the Sam and Leo have always been they've always been trying to just get fast, but with how football is, you can get faster and get even lighter with the Leo position, and then also informing Brock Hewitt that they'd been running bare fronts for a few years.
That was a great moment in
That
Seattle
was
sports history.
rather
I think,
amusing.
yeah, and the premise there, you're getting, you would be distilling what Pete Carroll fundamentally thinks about football. Ultimately, he doesn't want a B gap problem in his front, but then he also likes edge rushers. So, how do you combine those two elements? It's difficult to do that. So, the easiest way is run a 5-man front, and his 4-3 fronts have always been mostly a 5-man front, right? It's just
You want to be able to do everything. You want to be able to cover
right.
down. You want to be able to set the edges strong. You want to have no bubbles. You want to keep your linebackers clean. And often the bare front, or in a lot of these cases, a mint kind of front, which kind of
Yeah.
is shading more towards certain aspects, is the solution. And
Yeah, all right. And
then the
then
balance of it all comes back to how do you want to rush the passer the best? Well,
balance.
generally speaking, if you want to rush the passer with 4, it's very hard to do it, or harder to do in the odd front. You have to get back into the even front world, and that's basically the battle Seattle had. And last year they went too much to the rush 4 out of the 2-4-5 stuff. But Griff, go on,
So
say what you want to say.
but all those things you just said, doesn't that make you think that the ultimate player to be as flexible as you want that they've had is Michael Bennett? Because he can solve all those problems, and you can weave in and out of whatever front you want. It doesn't matter because he's
I was
there.
going to say Alden Smith, but anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
but yeah, like anyway.
But the takes from Pete Carroll's thing was he's basically saying how they've always been a hybrid defense and they always will be. That either player in the bear looks can now rush or do any coverage that they want, basically from that look feasibly. Obviously, you don't want him man covering a slot, but if it was man coverage, he could peel with the running back or potentially cover a tight end if in a pinch, and then
right, go ahead. My bad.
finally, in 2022, it comes across like they were trying to do a few too many Fangio ideas that didn't really fit what Seattle needed. That was my interpretation. Like Pete said, how they just didn't quite understand, and they're more dialed in now. Basically, is what he said. So in 23, the read again is more that they'll do more bare fronts, and more one gapping unless they need to 2 gap. But I don't know. Anyway, Griff, what you're being mischievous.
I was just gonna say, like when you said to quote what you said about quoting Pete Carroll about how they've always been a 4-3 hybrid team. Isn't that why this transition to 3-4 Bear went so under the radar in 23 years ago? I mean, isn't that why Brock Hewitt, who knows a crap ton about football, why even he was kind of, because he's probably only watching the broadcast angle because he has to watch tape on the college teams that he's doing in the fall, right? Like he's not necessarily watching tape every week on the Seahawks. From the sideline, you might miss that they're actually running a 3-4 versus a 4-3 because their classic reduced 4-3 under and over fronts is so similar. Like that's why the transition wasn't a big deal, because you're just tweaking. You're making 2 adjustments to your front, and boom, you've got odd space. You've got a 3-4 now, and you can do it with the same body types, the same roster. The only consideration is how do you handle the skill sets of who's rushing and who's dropping.
And history here proves insightful in that when Vince Young ran all over USC in the Rose Bowl and he ran in for the touchdown where Frosty Rucker, who was 275 pounds, 280 pounds, he's the guy dropping off the edge into coverage as a hot coverage player, so they fire zone the other way. But he's the guy in space trying to tackle Vince Young, is basically playing he's in an outside linebacker position. Yeah. And so the next year, everyone, all the writers, and I'd have to go back in time to actually understand whether this was official or not, but all the writers called USC moving to a 3-4. They said they've moved to 3-4 personnel. Clay Matthews, Brian Cushing were their primary 2 edges. They also had another 250-pound guy who I forgot the name of. My apologies. I think he might have started over Cushing. But they just did exactly what Seattle's done now. The only difference being they didn't have this kind of Fangio element. It was still pure Pete, and Pete calling the defense. He was still the DC. So, but they did run a crap ton of coverage. They ran a lot more different coverages. So,
and then he gets to Seattle, and then they don't run the 3-4 Bear as much. And why is that? Probably because they can't find 2 Leo types. Like those body types weren't available to them. So he's just adapting to what's available and what's required.
The few times they did do it, because they didn't really need it, but the few times they did do it, and why didn't they need it? Because at the time, the NFL was very much still 21 personnel, 12 personnel, pro formation stuff, heavy run game. You need base out there. But then the few times they did run it was when mobile quarterbacks, so Robert Griffin, Colin Kaepernick, Cam Newton, that sort of stuff. Anyway, that was a brief history lesson. And we got into the weeds of scheme. But the Seahawks had a rookie minicamp. Griff and I will be back on potentially Thursday, maybe Friday, with very exciting stuff. We're going to be diving into Devon Witherspoon tape live on air with you guys. Let us know what you want to know about Devon Witherspoon. Tweet at us. But yeah, it'll be a tape heavy stuff. And yeah, we appreciate you tuning into this one. Everyone follow Griffin at CMike Spin Move. Follow me at Matty F. Brown. Follow the podcast at Seattle Overload. Give us a 5-star review, please. And until next time, please. Hey, Griff, if you don't ask, you don't get. And that's to be polite. And until next time, this has been the Seattle Overload podcast.